The morning briefing room at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base smelled like burned coffee and the kind of nervous energy that came before every combat mission. Captain Sarah Chen sat in the second row, her flight suit crisp despite the Arizona heat already building outside. Around her, 23 other pilots shifted in their seats, some tapping pens against notepads, others staring at the blank projection screen with the 1,000-yard stare of people who'd seen too much. Sarah was 34 years old, though the streaks of premature gray in her dark hair made her look older. She'd earned every one of those gray hairs over 12 years of service, 8 of them flying the A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog, as everyone called it. The plane wasn't pretty, it wasn't fast, but it could take a beating like nothing else in the sky, and it saved lives on the ground. That's what mattered to Sarah. "Attention on deck," someone called, and the room stood as Colonel Marcus Reeves strode in. He was a large man with a jaw that looked carved from granite and eyes that never seemed to blink. Behind him came Major Tom Hendricks, the squadron's executive officer, and Captain Brad Mitchell, the golden boy of the squadron. Brad caught Sarah's eye and smirked. That smirk said everything it always did. "Still here, Chen? Thought you'd have washed out by now." Sarah kept her face neutral. She'd learned that lesson early. Show no weakness. Give them nothing to use against you. "Sit down, people," Reeves said, his voice filling the room without effort. The projection screen flickered to life, showing a map of a region Sarah recognized immediately, the Kandahar province in Afghanistan, though officially they weren't calling it that anymore. After the withdrawal, after the chaos, after the promises that it was over, some missions still happened. Quiet missions, the kind that didn't make the news. 24 hours ago, a special forces team was inserted here. Reeves pointed to a valley surrounded by mountains. Their mission was time-sensitive intelligence gathering. They were supposed to be in and out in 6 hours. The room had gone completely silent. "They're not out," Reeves continued. "As of 0600 this morning, they came under heavy fire from a force we're estimating at 200 hostiles. They're pinned down in this compound here." He clicked to the next slide, showing satellite imagery of a small cluster of buildings. "They have wounded. They're low on ammunition, and they're 30 miles from the nearest friendly position." Sarah felt her jaw tighten. 30 miles in that terrain might as well be 300. "Our mission is to provide close air support while 2 Chinooks go in for extraction," Reeves said. "We'll have 12 Warthogs in the air, working in pairs. You'll be assigned sectors around the compound. The enemy has heavy weapons, including multiple AAA positions and at least 2 MAN-PADS that we know of. MAN-PADS, Man-Portable Air Defense Systems, shoulder-fired missiles that could knock a plane out of the sky. Sarah had dodged them before. Twice she'd come home with shrapnel damage from near misses. The A-10 was tough, but it wasn't invincible. "Mitchell and Kowalski, you'll take the north sector," Reeves said, reading from his list. "Anderson and Price, you've got east, Davis and Chen." "Sir," Brad Mitchell interrupted, standing up. "Request permission to speak." Reeves frowned. "Make it quick, Mitchell." "Sir, with all due respect, this mission is high risk. We're going to be in a hot LZ with limited egress options. I think we need our most experienced pilots in every position." He paused, glancing back at Sarah. "Maybe Chen should sit this one out. Let someone with more combat hours take her slot." The room went quiet. Sarah felt every eye turn toward her. She kept her breathing steady, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Don't let them see it bother you. "Captain Chen has plenty of combat hours, Mitchell," Major Hendricks said from the front, his voice tight. Sure, Brad said, holding up his hands like he was being reasonable. "I'm just saying this isn't a training run. We need people who can handle the pressure. No offense meant." No offense meant? That was Brad's specialty. The backhanded comment delivered with a smile, always with plausible deniability. "Chen's logged 218 combat hours," Hendricks continued. "That's more than half the pilots in this room." "Book hours, yeah," Brad said. "But when things get real, when the bullets are flying and you've got men on the ground counting on you, that's different. That takes something extra. No disrespect to Captain Chen, but nothing, Mitchell," Colonel Reeves cut him off. "Chen is flying this mission. Now sit down and let me finish the briefing." Brad sat, but not before giving Sarah another look. This one said, "I tried to save you. What happens next is on you." Sarah stared straight ahead. She'd heard variations of this speech for years. In flight school, instructors had questioned whether she had the physical strength for the job. In her first squadron, men twice her size had joked about whether she could handle the G-forces, the stress, the violence of combat aviation. She'd proved them wrong every time. But it never stopped. Every new assignment, every new mission, she had to prove herself again. Reeves continued the briefing, detailing the flight plan, the communication protocols, the emergency procedures. Sarah absorbed every word, committing it to memory. Her wingman would be Captain Marcus Davis, a quiet man from Tennessee who'd been flying warthogs for 6 years. He was solid, reliable, if not particularly imaginative. They'd be assigned the Western Sector, the most exposed approach to the compound. It was also the sector that would take the most punishment from the enemy's defensive positions. Sarah knew exactly why they'd been given that position. The most dangerous sector went to the pilot they could most afford to lose. After the briefing, Sarah headed to the locker room to gear up. The full flight suit, survival vest, helmet, gloves, each piece was familiar, worn smooth by countless missions. She was checking her sidearm when she heard the door open behind her. "Don't let Mitchell get to you," a voice said. Sarah turned to see Captain Jessica Torres, one of the few other women in the squadron. Jess flew F-16s, not warthogs, but they'd become friends over the past year. "I'm not letting him get to me," Sarah said, sliding the pistol into her vest. "Good, because he's full of it." Jess leaned against the locker. "You're one of the best pilots here, and everybody knows it. Brad's just insecure because you've got more decorations than he does." Sarah managed a small smile. It was true. She had a distinguished flying cross, an air medal with Valor device, and a Purple Heart from a mission 2 years ago when she'd taken ground fire that shredded her left engine. She'd still completed the mission and brought the plane home. But decorations didn't stop the whispers. They didn't stop men like Brad from questioning whether she belonged. "You be careful out there," Jess said. "Western sector is going to be hot." "Always am," Sarah replied. But as she headed to the flight line, gear bag slung over her shoulder, she thought about the Special Forces team trapped in that valley. Someone's son, someone's father, maybe someone's husband. They were counting on her to do her job, regardless of what Brad Mitchell or anyone else thought about whether she could handle it. The A-10 Thunderbolt II sat waiting on the tarmac like a patient warhorse. It was an ugly plane, squat and angular, built around the enormous GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon that formed its centerpiece. That cannon could fire 70 rounds per second, each one capable of shredding an armored vehicle. The plane carried over 16,000 pounds of ordnance on 11 hardpoints. It was slow, with a max speed of barely 400 miles per hour. But it could fly low, loiter long, and take damage that would destroy any other aircraft. Sarah had named her plane Phoenix after bringing it home on one engine, hydraulics failing and half the tail section missing. The crew chief, a grizzled sergeant named Rodriguez, had looked at the wreckage and said it should never have made it back. But it had. They'd repaired it, and Sarah had been flying it ever since. Now she walked around the aircraft, doing her pre-flight check with Rodriguez beside her, calling out each item. "Engines look good, Captain," Rodriguez said. "Fresh oil, full fuel load. We've got you loaded with Mavericks on the inboard pylons, mixed HE and incendiary rounds for the gun, and 2 sidewinders for self-defense, just in case." "Let's hope I don't need those," Sarah said, running her hand along the fuselage. "You're going into bad country, ma'am," Rodriguez said quietly. "Just come back, okay? This bird's been through hell with you before. It'll do it again." Sarah nodded. Rodriguez had been maintaining her aircraft for 3 years. He knew every rivet, every patch, every battle scar. In some ways, he trusted the plane more than she did. She climbed the ladder into the cockpit. The interior was cramped and utilitarian, banks of switches, gauges, displays, all arranged within reach. Sarah strapped in, securing the 5-point harness tight across her chest and lap. She connected her oxygen mask, her communication headset, and ran through the startup checklist. The engines spooled up with a rising whine, then settled into a steady roar. Around her, the other 11 warthogs were doing the same, a chorus of turbofans preparing for war. "Davis Monthan Tower, this is Hawkeye Flight, requesting taxi clearance," she heard the flight leader say over the radio. "Hawkeye Flight, you're cleared to taxi, runway 27. One by one, the 12 aircraft rolled toward the runway. Sarah was number 7 in the formation. Marcus Davis pulled into position beside her, his aircraft painted with the name Rebel Yell on the nose. "Hawkeye 7, com check," Davis said over their private channel. Hawkeye 7 reads you 5 by 5, Sarah replied. You ready for this? Always. There was a pause, then Davis said, Don't pay attention to Mitchell, guy's a glory hound. You and me will do our job, keep those guys alive, and be home for dinner. Roger that, Sarah said. But as the first pair of warthogs thundered down the runway and lifted into the bright Arizona sky, Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came before every combat mission. It was part fear, part anticipation. She'd learned long ago that fear was normal. Only fools weren't afraid. The trick was to use the fear, channel it into focus. Her turn came. She advanced the throttles, feeling the plane surge forward, picking up speed. The runway markings blurred past. At 140 knots, she pulled back on the stick, and Phoenix lifted off the ground, climbing into the morning sun. Below, Davis-Monthan Air Force Base shrank to toy-sized buildings and miniature runways. Ahead, the other warthogs formed up into a loose formation. They turned east, toward the sunrise, toward the long flight across the ocean that would take them to Afghanistan. To the mission. To the valley where 12 men waited for rescue, surrounded by enemies who wanted them dead. Sarah settled into the rhythm of flight, monitoring her instruments, maintaining formation. It would be hours before they reached the combat zone. Hours of flying in silence, nothing but the drone of engines and the occasional radio check. She thought about the men on the ground. She wondered if they knew help was coming. She wondered if they were scared, or if training and adrenaline had pushed the fear away into some locked corner of their minds. She thought about Brad Mitchell's words, that takes something extra. Maybe he was right. Maybe combat did take something extra. But Sarah had learned something over her years in the cockpit, something men like Brad never seemed to understand. It wasn't about being the strongest, or the fastest, or the most aggressive. It was about being reliable, about doing your job when everything was falling apart, when people were counting on you, when failure meant someone didn't go home. That's what took something extra. That's what she'd prove today. As the 12 warthogs flew east, the sun climbed higher in the sky, turning the world below into a patchwork of browns and greens. Somewhere ahead, across thousands of miles of ocean and desert, men were fighting for their lives. Sarah was coming, and she'd bring them home. Or she'd die trying. The flight across the Atlantic was long and monotonous, punctuated by 2 mid-air refuelings from Air Force tankers. Sarah went through the delicate dance of maneuvering her aircraft into position behind the massive KC-135, extending her refueling probe to connect with the drogue basket trailing behind the tanker. It took precision and patience, especially when turbulence made the basket bounce and sway. After the second refueling, they crossed into European airspace, then continued east over the Mediterranean. The sun set behind them, and they flew on through darkness, navigating by instruments and the dim glow of cockpit lights. Sarah's back ached from sitting in the same position for hours. Her throat was dry despite the water tube connected to her vest, but she pushed the discomfort aside, focusing on the mission ahead. They landed at a forward operating base just after midnight local time, a sprawl of temporary buildings and hardened aircraft shelters carved out of the desert. The base had no official name, just a designation, FOB Stryker. Sarah had been here twice before on previous deployments. The pilots gathered in the operations center for a final briefing. The room was smaller than the one at Davis-Monthan, more cramped, with maps pinned to plywood walls and a coffee maker that looked like it dated from the First Gulf War. Colonel Reeves stood at the front, looking tired but focused. Beside him was a Special Forces captain named Hayes, a lean man with a beard and eyes that had seen too much. Here's the current situation, Hayes said, his voice rough. My team, Call Sign Vanguard, has been under siege for 31 hours. We're down to about 20% ammunition. We have 3 wounded, 1 critical. The enemy force has grown to an estimated 300 fighters, with more arriving every few hours. He pulled up a satellite image on the laptop. They've surrounded the compound, heavy weapons here, here, and here. He pointed to 3 positions around the building complex. They've got a pair of Zu-23 anti-aircraft guns set up on this ridge to the west. That's your primary concern for the gun-run approach. Sarah leaned forward, studying the map. The Zu-23 was a Soviet-era twin-barreled cannon, deadly accurate and capable of shredding an aircraft. The guns were positioned on high ground, giving them excellent coverage of any approach from the west. exactly where she and Davis would be flying. The extraction will happen at 05:30, Reeves said. That gives us about 4 hours. 2 Chinooks will come in from the north, land in the compound courtyard, load the team, and get out. Your job is to keep the enemy suppressed during that window. Questions? Brad Mitchell raised his hand. Rules of engagement. Weapons free on any hostile forces in the engagement area, Hayes said. But understand something. There are civilians in some of these buildings. We've got thermal imagery showing women and children in at least 3 structures near the compound. You need to be precise. Sarah felt her jaw tighten. Precision under fire with enemies shooting back, worrying about hitting civilians. This was the kind of mission that could go wrong in 1,000 ways. What's the enemy morale like? Marcus Davis asked. Are they dug in for a siege or are they aggressive? Hayes smiled grimly. Oh, they're aggressive. They've tried to storm the compound 4 times already. We've held them off, but barely. They know we're running out of options. They'll hit us hard right before dawn, trying to overrun us before help arrives. Then we need to make sure they know help has arrived, Sarah said quietly. Hayes looked at her. You Hawkeye 7. Yes, sir. You're on the western sector. Those ZU-23s are going to light you up the moment you come in range. I've dealt with AAA before. Not like this, Hayes said. These guys are good. They're patient. They'll wait until you're committed to your run, then they'll open up. And at low altitude, you don't have much room to maneuver. Sarah nodded. She understood the danger, but understanding didn't change the mission. The briefing ended 20 minutes later. The pilots dispersed to grab food and a few hours of sleep. Takeoff was scheduled for 0400, giving them time to reach the valley just as the sun started to rise. Sarah found a cot in the female quarters, a small plywood room with 6 bunks, only 2 of which were occupied. She lay down without undressing, knowing she'd need to be up in 3 hours. Sleep came fitfully, filled with fragmented dreams of aircraft falling from the sky, of men screaming for help she couldn't provide. She woke to her phone alarm at 0330. Her mouth tasted like sand and every joint ached, but she pushed herself up and headed to the bathroom. She splashed cold water on her face, staring at herself in the mirror. You can do this, she told her reflection. You've done it before, you'll do it again. The words felt hollow, but she said them anyway. By 0400, all 12 pilots were on the flight line. The night air was cold, and stars blazed overhead with a clarity impossible to see in the States. The warthogs sat waiting, already pre-flighted by the ground crews. Rodriguez was there, having flown in on the same transport that brought spare parts and ammunition. He gave Sarah a thumbs up as she approached Phoenix. She's ready, Captain, he said. Fresh ordnance, full fuel, and I personally checked every system twice. Thanks, Chief, Sarah said. She climbed into the cockpit and went through her checklist. Everything showed green. Engines spooled up smoothly. Around her, the other aircraft were doing the same. Hawkeye Flight, this is Tower, the radio crackled. You are cleared for takeoff, runway 18. Current winds 270 at 8 knots. Weather at target area is clear, visibility unlimited. Good hunting. Copy that, Tower, the flight leader replied. Hawkeye Flight, check in. One by one, each aircraft reported ready. When it came to Sarah's turn, she keyed her mic. Hawkeye 7 ready. Hawkeye 8 ready, Davis added. The first 2 warthogs rolled down the runway, their engines screaming. They lifted off in unison, climbing into the pre-dawn darkness. Sarah's turn came. She advanced the throttles and felt Phoenix surge forward. The runway lights blurred into streaks. At rotation speed, she pulled back and the wheels left the ground. They formed up into a loose formation and turned southeast, toward the mountains that separated them from the valley where Vanguard was fighting for survival. The flight took 40 minutes, and with each passing mile, Sarah could feel the tension building. As they approached the target area, the sky began to lighten in the east. Not full sunrise yet, just the first gray hints of dawn. Hawkeye Flight, this is Vanguard Actual. Captain Hayes' voice came over the radio, tense but controlled. We are under heavy attack. Enemy is massing for another assault. We need air support now. Vanguard Hawkeye Lead, we're 2 minutes out. Hang tight. Sarah adjusted her course, dropping lower as they entered the valley. The mountains rose on either side, dark and forbidding. Below, she could see the compound, a cluster of mud brick buildings surrounded by walls. Even from altitude, she could see muzzle flashes, countless points of light where the enemy was firing at the besieged Special Forces team. Hawkeye 7 and 8, begin your approach, the flight leader ordered. Suppress those AAA positions. 7 copy. Sarah banked left, descending toward the western ridge where the ZU-23 guns waited. Marcus Davis followed in formation, his aircraft 200 yards off her right wing. Steady, she murmured to herself. Nice and steady. The ridge came into focus. She could see the 2 anti-aircraft guns now, their barrels pointed skyward, tracking. Tiny figures moved around them, men feeding ammunition belts, adjusting aim. Sarah armed her Maverick missiles, designating the first gun position with her targeting system. The locked tone sounded in her headset, a steady beep that confirmed the missile had acquired the target. Fox 3, she called, launching the Maverick. The missile dropped from her wing, ignited, and streaked toward the ridge on a trail of white smoke. 3 seconds later, it impacted directly on the gun position. The explosion was brilliant orange, sending debris spinning into the air. Good hit 7, Davis called, engaging second position. But before Davis could fire, the second ZU-23 opened up. The anti-aircraft fire was different from anything Sarah had encountered before. Not random spraying, but precise, calculated bursts. The tracers arced toward her like angry orange hornets, and she could hear the rounds crack past her canopy. She broke hard right, pulling 6 GS, the suit squeezing her legs and torso to keep blood from pooling. The world spun, ground and sky trading places. More tracers followed her, relentless. 7, you've got more guns, Davis shouted. 4 o'clock low. Sarah looked and saw 3 more anti-aircraft positions she hadn't spotted before, all firing. The intelligence had been wrong. There weren't 2 guns, there were 5. And they were all shooting at her. Vanguard Hawkeye 7, she called, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Be advised, enemy AAA is heavier than expected. Multiple gun positions on the western ridge. Copy 7. Those guns have been chewing us up for 2 days. Can you take them out? Sarah pulled her aircraft into a climb, gaining altitude to get out of the most effective range of the guns. She could see Davis maneuvering below, launching his own Maverick at the second gun. It hit, another explosion marking the kill. But 3 guns remained, and they were all tracking her now. 8, stay high, Sarah ordered. I'm going in. -7, too much fire down there. Someone has to take them out, or the Chinooks will never make it in. She knew it was crazy even as she said it. 3 anti-aircraft guns, all focused on her, all manned by experienced crews. The smart move was to call in artillery or wait for other aircraft to help. But Vanguard didn't have time. The Special Forces team was about to be overrun. Sarah pushed the stick forward, diving toward the ridge. She jinked left, then right, then left again, making herself a difficult target. The tracers followed, always just behind, always adjusting. She armed her cannon, the massive GAU-8 Avenger that could spit 70 rounds per second. At 3,000 feet, she squeezed the trigger. The entire aircraft shook as the cannon fired. The sound was a deep, ripping brrrrrrt that she felt in her bones. 30-millimeter rounds rained down on the ridge, walking across the third gun position. Men scattered. The gun itself seemed to disintegrate under the onslaught. 2 guns left. But she'd stayed straight and leveled too long. The 4th gun had all the time it needed to aim. Sarah saw the muzzle flash, saw the tracers coming directly at her, no more leading the target. These rounds were perfectly aimed. She broke hard, but too late. The rounds hit Phoenix like a sledgehammer. The aircraft shuddered violently. Warning lights exploded across her instrument panel. Master caution, hydraulic failure, electrical system damage, engine fire on the right. 7 is hit, she called, taking damage. Sarah, get out of there, Davis shouted, all radio protocol forgotten. But Sarah could still hear the voice of Captain Hayes in her headset, calling for help as enemy fighters tried to climb the compound walls. She had 1 Maverick left and 1 gun position remaining. Instead of climbing away to safety, Sarah held her dive, fighting the damaged aircraft as it tried to roll left. The stick felt mushy, hydraulics failing, but the targeting system still worked. She designated the 5th gun, got a lock, and fired her last Maverick. The missile launched, wavered slightly, then corrected and slammed into the gun position. The explosion was larger this time. She must have hit their ammunition supply. "All guns suppressed," she reported, her voice tight. "Hawkeye 7 is damaged, breaking east." She pulled back on the stick, trying to climb, but Phoenix wasn't responding right. The right engine was definitely on fire. She could see the flames reflected in her mirrors. Hydraulic fluid was streaming from somewhere under the right wing. The aircraft wanted to roll inverted. "7, what's your status?" the flight leader called. Sarah scanned her instruments, trying to assess the damage while fighting to keep the plane level. "Right engine fire, hydraulic failure, electrical damage. I'm losing altitude." "Can you make it back to base?" She did the math quickly. She was 60 miles from Fob Striker, losing 500 feet per minute with an aircraft that was barely controllable. She'd never make it. "Negative," she said. "I'm going to have to put her down." "Sarah, eject," Davis called. "You're over hostile territory. Eject now while you have altitude." But Sarah looked down and saw the compound, saw the muzzle flashes as Vanguard continued fighting. If she ejected, Phoenix would crash into the mountains, maybe into the valley, maybe into the compound itself. Thousands of pounds of unexpended ammunition and fuel crashing uncontrolled. And she'd be on the ground, in hostile territory, another person who needed rescue. "Negative," she said again. "I'm going to try to make the LZ." "The LZ," Davis sounded incredulous. "Sarah, you'll never." "The compound has a courtyard where the Chinooks are supposed to land. If I can put her down there, at least I'll be with Vanguard." It was insane. The courtyard was maybe 100 feet by 100 feet, surrounded by walls with an aircraft that was barely flying. But it was the only choice that didn't make things worse. "Vanguard Actual Hawkeye 7, she called. "I'm coming in damaged. Need to make an emergency landing in your courtyard. How much space do you have?" There was a long pause, then Hayes came back. "Say again, 7, did you say you're landing here?" "Affirmative. I can't make it back to base, and I'm not leaving you guys to deal with another rescue." Another pause. "Jesus, okay, stand by." Sarah muscled the aircraft around, heading back toward the compound. The right engine was still burning, and now the left engine was showing elevated temperatures. She shut down the right engine and activated the fire suppression system, but she could still see flames. The compound was 2 miles away, then 1 mile, then half a mile. Through the smoke and pre-dawn gloom, she could see it, the walls, the buildings, the courtyard in the center. It looked impossibly small. "Vanguard 7, I'm on final approach. You might want to get everyone away from the courtyard." "Copy that, we're clear." Sarah dropped her landing gear, praying it would extend despite the hydraulic damage. The indicators showed green, the gear was down and locked. One small miracle. She was at 500 feet, descending fast. 400 feet, 300. The compound filled her vision. The walls looked even higher from this angle. If she came in too high, she'd clear the walls but overshoot the courtyard and crash into the buildings. Too low, and she'd hit the walls themselves. 200 feet. She cut her remaining engine to idle, gliding now, nothing but momentum and gravity. The aircraft dropped like a stone, but she was over the walls inside the compound. 100 feet. The courtyard rushed up at her. She pulled back on the stick, trying to flare to bleed off speed. But without hydraulics, the controls barely responded. 50 feet. The ground was right there. Phoenix hit hard, the landing gear absorbing the impact with a screech of metal. The aircraft bounced, came down again, bounced once more. Sarah stood on the brakes, feeling them grab, feeling the aircraft slow. But the courtyard was too short. The far wall was coming up fast. She was going to hit it. At the last second, the right main gear collapsed, the damage from the anti-aircraft fire finally giving way. Phoenix spun hard to the right, slewing sideways. The left wing clipped the wall, tearing off with a shriek of rending metal. Then everything was still. Sarah sat in the cockpit, breathing hard, her hands still gripping the stick. She was alive. She was on the ground, and somehow, impossibly, she was inside the compound with Vanguard. "Hawkeye 7, Vanguard Actual." Hayes's voice came over the radio, sounding stunned. "Did you just land a goddamn A-10 in our courtyard?" Sarah let out a shaky laugh. "Technically, I crashed it, but I'm down in one piece." Around her, she could hear gunfire, voices shouting, explosions in the distance. She was in the middle of a battle now, no longer safely above it. She popped the canopy and started unbuckling her harness. The mission wasn't over. It was just beginning. Sarah climbed down from Phoenix's cockpit, her legs shaky from adrenaline. The courtyard was maybe 100 feet across, surrounded by 12-foot walls made of mud brick and concrete. Her aircraft sat at an angle, the collapsed right landing gear making it list like a wounded bird. Fuel was leaking from somewhere, making dark puddles on the ground. The right engine still smoldered, wisps of smoke rising into the pre-dawn sky. Around the edges of the courtyard, she could see the compound's buildings, single-story structures with small windows, some of them pockmarked with bullet holes. And there, emerging from a doorway with his rifle raised, was Captain Hayes. He was shorter than she'd expected, maybe 5'9", with a thick beard streaked with gray. His uniform was covered in dust and what looked like dried blood. Behind him came 3 more Special Forces soldiers, all of them looking exhausted and wary. "Captain Chen," Hayes called. "That's me," Sarah said, unhooking her survival vest and checking her sidearm. Hayes jogged across the courtyard, his men spreading out to cover the walls. When he reached her, he looked at the wrecked aircraft, then back at her, shaking his head. "That was either the bravest or the craziest thing I've ever seen," he said. "Little bit of both," Sarah admitted. Her heart was still racing and she could feel her hands trembling. She clenched them into fists. "What's the tactical situation?" "Not good," Hayes said. He led her quickly toward the main building, keeping low. Gunfire cracked from beyond the walls, sporadic but constant. "We've got about 200 hostiles surrounding us, maybe more. They've been probing our defenses all night, and they'll probably try a major push right before your helicopters arrive." They ducked into the building. The interior was dim, lit by a few battery-powered lamps. The smell hit Sarah immediately, unwashed bodies, gunpowder, and the copper tang of blood. Along one wall, she saw 3 men lying on stretchers. A medic was working on one of them, his hands red. "That's Rodriguez, no relation to your crew chief, I assume," Hayes said, gesturing to the wounded man. "Took shrapnel yesterday. Jenkins there has a through-and-through in his leg. Miller is the worst, sucking chest wound. We've kept him stable, but he needs a hospital soon." Sarah felt a cold weight in her stomach. These men were depending on her and the other pilots to keep them alive long enough for extraction. "How many shooters do you have?" she asked. 12, including me. Everyone's running on fumes. We're down to about 30 magazines of ammo total, a few grenades, and one AT-4 rocket launcher with 2 rounds. He paused. "We weren't supposed to get into a sustained firefight. This was supposed to be a quick in and out." "What went wrong?" Hayes's jaw tightened. "Bad intel. We were told the compound would be lightly guarded. Instead, we walked into a meeting of half the Taliban leadership in the province. They called in reinforcements, and we've been stuck here ever since." Sarah checked her watch. It was 05:15. 15 minutes until the Chinooks were supposed to arrive. She could hear the other warthogs above, the distinctive sound of their engines mixed with the deeper roar of their cannons as they made gun runs on enemy positions. "Where do you need me?" she asked. Hayes looked surprised. "You're a pilot." "I'm also a soldier, and right now you're short on bodies." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Northeast corner. Sergeant Kowalski is up there. That's where they've been hitting us hardest. You know how to use an M4. "Qualified expert," Sarah said. Hayes grabbed a rifle from a rack on the wall and tossed it to her, along with 4 magazines. "Try to make the ammo count. And Captain, welcome to the infantry." Sarah followed another soldier, a young man who introduced himself as Corporal Diaz, up a narrow stairway to the roof. The flat surface gave them a clear view over the walls and into the surrounding terrain. The compound sat in a shallow valley, with hills rising on 3 sides. In the growing light, Sarah could see enemy positions scattered across those hills, men moving between rocks and trees, muzzle flashes winking in the shadows. "Ma'am," a gruff voice said. Sarah turned to see a man who had to be Sergeant Kowalski, built like a tank, with arms the size of her thighs and a face that looked carved from granite. He was crouched behind a low wall, his rifle pointed toward the northeast. "Heard you just crashed an A-10 in our courtyard." "Seemed like the thing to do at the time," Sarah said. Kowalski grinned. "You pilots are crazy. Glad you're here, though. Can you shoot?" "Well enough." "Good. See that tree line at about 200 yards?" He pointed to a cluster of scraggly pines. They've got at least 20 guys in there. Every few minutes they pop up and take shots at us. We've been trying to keep their heads down, but we're low on ammo. Sarah settled in next to him, checking her rifle. The M4 was clean and well-maintained, the action smooth. She extended the stock, adjusted the sight, and chambered a round. "Just like old times," she muttered. "You've done ground combat before?" Kowalski asked. "Basic training, advanced combat survival school, and I pulled security duty at a FOB in Iraq back in 2015 when they were short-handed." She paused. "Not like this, though." "Well, here's hoping you're a fast learner." The sky continued to lighten, the stars fatting. Sarah could see more details now, the rough terrain, the enemy positions, the way they'd set up interlocking fields of fire. These weren't random insurgents. This was a coordinated force with real military training. Above, she heard the familiar sound of an A-10's cannon. She looked up and saw one of the warthogs. She thought it might be Mitchell's aircraft, making a run on the western ridge. The cannon fire was like thunder, and she saw explosions blossom where the rounds impacted. "Your friends are earning their pay today," Kowalski said. "They're good pilots," Sarah said. Even Mitchell, much as she disliked him, was skilled in the cockpit. As if summoned by her thoughts, she heard Mitchell's voice over the radio frequency. Diaz had a tactical radio strapped to his vest, and he'd set it to monitor the air-to-ground coordination channel. "Vanguard Hawkeye 2, Mitchell called. "We're Winchester on Mavericks and getting low on cannon rounds. What's your status on the extraction?" "Hawkeye 2, Vanguard Actual," Hayes replied from somewhere below. "Chinooks are inbound, ETA 10 minutes. Can you keep the enemy suppressed until then?" "We'll do what we can. Be advised, we're seeing more enemy vehicles approaching from the south. Looks like technical trucks with heavy machine guns." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. More enemies meant more guns, more chaos when the helicopters tried to land. "Contact," Kowalski shouted, and Sarah snapped her attention back to the tree line. Men were emerging from the trees, running forward in short rushes. 20, 30, maybe 40 of them, all carrying AK-47s. They were trying to close the distance before the helicopters arrived. "Engage," Kowalski ordered. Sarah brought her rifle up, found a target, a man in dark clothing sprinting between two rocks, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The man went down. All along the rooftop, the Special Forces soldiers were firing in controlled bursts. Sarah shifted to another target, fired, shifted again. The training took over breathe, aim, squeeze, assess. She'd done this hundreds of times on ranges, but never with real people shooting back. Bullets cracked past her position, striking the wall in front of her and sending up puffs of dust. She ducked, counted to 3, then popped back up and found another target. The enemy was taking casualties, but they kept coming. These men weren't afraid to die. "Grenade," someone shouted. Sarah saw it, a dark object arcing through the air, heading for the rooftop. It landed 20 feet away. Everyone dropped flat. The grenade exploded with a sharp crack, shrapnel whistling overhead. Sarah felt something sting her left arm, but when she looked, it was just a scratch. "Everyone okay?" Kowalski called. Affirmatives came back. They returned to firing. The attack lasted 3 minutes, though it felt like an hour. Finally, the enemy fell back, leaving several bodies in the open ground between the tree line and the compound. "Chinooks inbound," Hayes called over the radio, 2 minutes. Sarah could hear them now, the heavy wop-wop-wop of helicopter rotors. She looked north and saw them, 2 massive CH-47 Chinooks flying low and fast, escorted by a pair of Apache attack helicopters. "Here we go," Kowalski muttered. "This is when they'll hit us hardest." He was right. The enemy knew this was their last chance. If Vanguard made it onto those helicopters, the mission failed. From every direction, enemy fighters emerged. They came from the tree line, from behind rocks, from buildings in the nearby village. Dozens of them, all firing at once. The rooftop erupted in chaos. Sarah fired until her magazine was empty, reloaded, fired again. The barrel of her rifle was getting hot. Brass casings piled up around her. One of the Apache swooped in, its chain gun ripping into enemy positions. The Chinooks descended toward the compound, their rotor wash kicking up massive clouds of dust. "Get the wounded to the LZ," Hayes was shouting. "Move, move, move." Sarah heard explosions from the south, more anti-aircraft fire targeting the helicopters. One of the warthogs dove in response, cannon blazing. The first Chinook touched down in the courtyard, right next to Sarah's wrecked. The ramp dropped, and she could see the crew chief waving, urging them to hurry. "Go," Kowalski shouted. "Get down there." Sarah slung her rifle and ran for the stairs. All around the compound, the Special Forces team was falling back, firing as they moved. The wounded were being carried on stretchers. Hayes was at the courtyard, directing traffic, his rifle in one hand. Sarah helped Corporal Diaz carry one of the wounded men, Rodriguez, with the shrapnel wounds. He was conscious, gritting his teeth against the pain. "You're going to be okay," Sarah told him as they ran. "Just hang on." They reached the helicopter. The crew chief grabbed Rodriguez and pulled him inside. Sarah turned back to help with the others. That's when she heard the distinctive whoosh of a rocket-propelled grenade. "RPG!" someone screamed. The grenade streaked across the courtyard and slammed into the second Chinook just as it was landing. The explosion was deafening, and flames erupted from the helicopter's side. It lurched, the rotors clipping the compound wall, and crashed onto its side. The crew chief stumbled out, bleeding from a head wound. Behind him, Sarah could see the pilots, one unconscious, one trying to drag his partner free. Without thinking, Sarah ran toward the burning helicopter. The heat was intense, flames licking up the fuselage. Ammunition was cooking off inside, small arms rounds popping like firecrackers. "Chen, get back," Hayes shouted. But Sarah was already there, pulling the injured pilot out through the crumpled doorway. The man was semi-conscious, mumbling something she couldn't understand. She dragged him across the courtyard as more RPGs exploded against the walls. Kowalski appeared beside her, grabbing the pilot's other arm. Together, they hauled him to the first Chinook, which was already overloaded with people. "We can't fit everyone," the crew chief shouted. "We're over max weight." Hayes looked at the burning helicopter, at his men, at the enemy closing in. His face was grim. "We'll hold here," he said. "Come back for us." "No," Sarah said. "You're not staying." She looked at her A-10, at Phoenix sitting damaged but intact. Then she looked at the Chinook, packed with wounded and soldiers. "I'll stay," she said. "I can use the plane's radio to coordinate air support, and I've got the weapon systems, the cannon still works, and I've got ammo left." "You can't fly it," Hayes protested. "No, but I can use the gun. The GAU-8 has a ground mode. I can provide covering fire from here." Hayes stared at her. "That's suicide." "So is everyone staying. At least this way most of you get out." She looked at him steadily. "It's the right call, Captain, you know it is." For a long moment no one spoke. Then Hayes nodded slowly. "Get everyone on board," he ordered. He looked at Sarah. "The gun has about 200 rounds left. Use them wisely." "I will." The Special Forces team piled into the Chinook, helping the wounded, the injured flight crew. Kowalski paused at the ramp, looking back at Sarah. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the craziest," he said. "Like I said, little bit of both." He nodded and climbed aboard. Hayes was the last one standing at the ramp. "We'll come back for you," he promised. "Soon as we refuel and rearm, we're coming back." "I'll be here," Sarah said. The ramp closed. The Chinook's engines screamed as the pilot pushed maximum power. The helicopter lifted off, struggling with the weight, clearing the walls by inches. It turned north and accelerated away, the Apache escort flanking it. And suddenly, Sarah was alone. The courtyard was empty except for her, the burning wreckage of the second Chinook, and her damaged A-10. Around the compound, she could hear enemy fighters closing in, shouting to each other, emboldened now that the helicopters were gone. Sarah ran to Phoenix and climbed back into the cockpit. The electrical systems were damaged, but she had battery power. She activated the weapons system, switching the GAU-8 cannon to ground mode. The targeting system was designed for air-to-ground attacks, but it could be used in a defensive role. She aimed the nose of the aircraft toward the main gate, the most likely avenue of approach. Through the HUD, she could see enemy fighters gathering, preparing for their final assault. Sarah's hands were steady on the controls. Her heart rate was elevated, but her breathing was controlled. This was it. This was what all the training had been for all the missions, all the times she'd proved herself. She thought about Brad Mitchell, about his smirk, about his words. That takes something extra. "Let's see what I've got," Sarah whispered. The sun had fully risen now, light spilling across the valley. It was going to be a beautiful morning. The compound was eerily quiet after the Chinook departed. Sarah sat in Phoenix's cockpit, sweating in the enclosed space, watching the enemy positions through her targeting display. The electrical system was failing, she could see indicators flickering, but the weapons system was still operational. The GAU-8 cannon was powered by its own backup system, designed to work even if everything else failed. 200 rounds left. She'd have to make every burst count. Through her headset, she could hear radio chatter from the other warthogs still providing air support overhead. They were running low on fuel and ammunition, preparing to break off and return to base. "Hawkeye Flight, this is Hawkeye 7, Sarah called. "I'm still on station, over." There was a moment of shocked silence. Then Marcus Davis's voice came back, tight with emotion. "Sarah, Jesus, we thought you evacuated with Vanguard." "Negative, I stayed behind to provide defensive fire. The extraction bird was overweight." "You stayed behind?" It was Brad Mitchell's voice now, and for once he didn't sound smug, he sounded disbelieving. "Chen, you're in a damaged aircraft surrounded by hostiles. You need to—" "I need to hold this position until reinforcements arrive," Sarah cut him off. "How long until the Chinook can return?" "At least 2 hours, the flight leader said. "They need to refuel and the other bird needs repairs. Sarah, can you hold that long?" 2 hours. Sarah looked at her ammunition counter, at the enemy fighters gathering beyond the walls, and did the math. "I'll hold," she said. "We're Winchester and need to RTB," the flight leader continued. "But we're sending another flight, their wheels up in 20 mics. 20 minutes before they took off, then another 40 minutes flight time. That meant she'd be alone for at least an hour before any air support arrived." "Copy that," Sarah said. "I'll see you on the other side." "Sarah," Davis started to say. "Hawkeye 8, you need to go. Your fuel state is critical. I'll be fine." She heard him take a shaky breath. Okay, just don't do anything stupid, all right." Sarah almost laughed. She was sitting in a wrecked plane in the middle of hostile territory, about to fight off hundreds of enemy soldiers by herself. Stupid had happened about an hour ago. "Roger that, Hawkeye 7 out." The sound of the warthogs faded as they turned west, heading back to base. Sarah was truly alone now. She checked her survival vest, taking inventory. Her pistol had 3 magazines. She had a combat knife, a signal flare, a small first aid kit, some water and energy bars, not much to survive on if things went badly. Movement caught her eye. Through the targeting system, she saw enemy fighters approaching the main gate. 20 men, all armed, moving cautiously. They thought the compound was empty now, abandoned. They were about to learn otherwise. Sarah waited until they were clustered at the gate, trying to force it open. Then she centered the targeting reticle on the group and squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 cannon erupted with that distinctive BRRRRRT sound. Even sitting in the cockpit, Sarah felt the vibration through her entire body. The 30mm rounds tore through the gate and into the men beyond. The destruction was horrific. Bodies torn apart, the heavy wooden gate shredded. The attack broke off immediately, survivors scrambling for cover. Sarah released the trigger, 20 rounds expended, 180 left. "This is Hawkeye 7 to any station," she called over the radio. "I have engaged enemy forces at my position. Multiple hostiles, KIA. Enemy is now aware of defensive capabilities." No one answered. She was outside the range of the base radio, and the other aircraft were too far away. She was on her own. For the next hour, Sarah fought off 3 more attacks. Each time, she waited until the enemy committed to an assault, then used short bursts from the cannon to break up their formations. Each time, they retreated, leaving bodies behind. But each attack was more coordinated than the last. They were learning, adapting, and she was running out of ammunition. The sun climbed higher, and the temperature inside the cockpit soared. Sarah's flight suit was soaked with sweat. She sipped water from the tube in her vest, trying to stay hydrated. At 0700, she heard a new sound, vehicles approaching from the south. She looked through the targeting system and felt her stomach drop. 3 technical trucks, pickup trucks with heavy machine guns mounted in the beds. Behind them, she could see at least 50 more fighters on foot. This wasn't a probe. This was a full assault. "Come on," Sarah muttered. "Where's my air support?" As if in answer, her radio crackled. Hawkeye 7, this is Hawkeye 9. We're inbound your position ETA 15 minutes. Can you hold? 15 minutes. Sarah looked at her ammunition counter, 40 rounds left, and at the approaching enemy force. I'll hold, she said. The technical trucks opened fire as they approached, their .50 caliber machine guns raking the compound walls. Sarah couldn't engage them yet. She needed to wait until they were closer, until she had a sure shot. Those trucks were the biggest threat. The infantry spread out, using the covering fire from the trucks to advance. They were good, professional. They knew what they were doing. Sarah watched them come, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. Patience, wait for the right moment. The trucks were at 200 yards, 150, 100. Now, she centered the reticle on the lead truck and fired. 3-second burst. The cannon rounds tore through the truck's engine block and into the cab. The vehicle exploded, flames and smoke billowing up. She shifted to the second truck, fired again. Another explosion. The third truck swerved, trying to retreat, but Sarah tracked it and fired her last burst. The truck lurched to a stop, smoke pouring from its hood. The cannon went silent. The ammunition counter read 0. Ammo depleted, Sarah called over the radio. I'm Winchester. Hawkeye 7, Hawkeye 9, we're 5 minutes out, can you? The radio died. The electrical system had finally given up. Sarah was completely cut off now. She looked at the enemy forces. They'd gone to ground after she destroyed the trucks, but now they were getting up, realizing she wasn't firing anymore. They started advancing again, more confident now. Sarah climbed out of the cockpit, grabbing her rifle and the spare magazines. The courtyard was exposed, no real cover except for the buildings. But if she could get to a defendable position, maybe she could hold out until air support arrived. She ran for the nearest building, the one where the Special Forces team had kept their supplies. The door was open, hanging on one hinge. Inside, she found what she was looking for, a case of ammunition, some grenades, and an A-10 rocket launcher with 1 round. Not much, she muttered, but it'll have to do. She heard voices outside, shouting in Pashto. They were in the compound now. Sarah grabbed the A-10 and moved to a window. She could see men spreading through the courtyard, checking the buildings, moving toward Phoenix. One of them climbed onto the aircraft, looking inside the cockpit. She aimed the rocket launcher, centered the sight on the group near her plane, and fired. The backblast was enormous in the confined space, and the rocket streaked out the window. It hit the ground next to Phoenix, and the explosion was deafening. Men were thrown through the air like rag dolls. Sarah dropped the empty launcher and grabbed her rifle. She fired through the window, dropping 2 more enemies. Return fire shattered the window, and she ducked as bullets chewed through the mud brick walls. This was it. This was where she'd make her stand. Time lost meaning. Sarah moved through the building, firing from different windows, using her grenades to buy herself space. The enemy kept coming, wave after wave. They wanted her dead now, wanted revenge for the damage she'd inflicted. She was down to her last magazine when she heard it. The beautiful, wonderful sound of jet engines and the brrrrrrt of A-10 cannons. Air support had arrived. Through the shattered window, Sarah saw the enemy fighters scatter as cannon fire tore through their positions. 2 warthogs swept low over the compound, their guns blazing. Bodies fell. Vehicles exploded. The coordinated assault dissolved into chaos. Hawkeye 7, Hawkeye 9. The radio, wait, she didn't have a radio anymore. But she could hear it anyway, coming from outside. She stumbled to the window and saw something that made her laugh despite everything. One of the warthogs was dropping a survival radio in a small container, parachuting down into the courtyard. Sarah ran out, grabbed the radio, and keyed the mic. Hawkeye 9, 7, you guys have great timing. Good to hear your voice, 7. Vanguard's inbound with fresh troops and extraction birds. Can you hold for 10 more minutes? After what I've been through, 10 minutes is nothing. But as she said it, Sarah felt her legs give out. She sat down hard against the wall, her hands shaking uncontrollably now that the immediate danger had passed. The adrenaline was wearing off and everything hurt. She looked at Phoenix at her plane. It was wrecked, landing gear collapsed, one wing gone, bullet holes stitched across the fuselage. But it had saved her life, had given her the means to fight back. Good bird, she whispered. The next 10 minutes passed in a blur. The warthogs circled overhead, keeping the enemy suppressed. Then she heard helicopters again, multiple Chinooks this time, escorted by Apache and more warthogs. The first helicopter landed in the courtyard, and Captain Hayes jumped out with a dozen fresh Special Forces soldiers. They quickly secured the perimeter while medics ran to Sarah. "I'm fine," she protested as they tried to examine her. "Ma'am, you're bleeding in about 6 places," one medic said. Sarah looked down and realized he was right. She had cuts from shrapnel, a bullet graze on her left arm she didn't remember getting, and various other wounds she'd been too focused to notice. "Okay, maybe I'm not fine," she admitted. Hayes knelt beside her, his face serious. "Captain Chen, what you did today? I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like it. You held off an entire enemy force by yourself." "I had a really big gun," Sarah said weakly. He laughed, but his eyes were wet. "You saved my entire team. Every one of them is alive because of you." Sarah felt tears on her own cheeks now. "That's the job, sir. That's what we do." They loaded her onto one of the Chinooks. As it lifted off, Sarah looked down at the compound, at Phoenix sitting alone in the courtyard. Her plane, her partner, they'd have to leave it. It was too damaged to recover. "We'll get another one," she told herself. "I'll fly again." But as the helicopter carried her away from the valley, away from the battle, Sarah finally let herself relax. She closed her eyes, listening to the rhythmic thump of the rotors. She'd done it. She'd proved herself in the most extreme way possible. And maybe, just maybe, it would finally be enough. The flight back to Fob Stryker took 40 minutes. Sarah spent most of it being patched up by the medics while Captain Hayes sat nearby, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief. The other Special Forces soldiers kept coming over to thank her, one after another, until she had to ask them to stop because the attention was overwhelming. "You don't understand," Sergeant Kowalski said. "We were dead, all of us. Then you show up, crash land like some kind of action movie, and proceed to hold off an entire army by yourself. That's not normal, ma'am. That's superhero stuff." "I just did what needed to be done," Sarah said. "Yeah, well, most people don't do what needs to be done when it means staying behind in hostile territory." When they landed at Fob Stryker, Sarah was surprised to find a crowd waiting. Word had spread about what happened, and it seemed like half the base had turned out. As she climbed down from the Chinook, someone started clapping. Then others joined in until the applause echoed across the tarmac. Sarah felt her face flush. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. She just wanted to debrief, get cleaned up, and maybe sleep for about 20 hours. Colonel Reeves was there, along with Major Hendricks. Reeves looked at her with an expression she'd never seen from him before, something like respect mixed with awe. "Captain Chen," he said formally, "welcome back." "Sir," Sarah replied, standing as straight as her exhausted body would allow. "The medics tell me you have multiple injuries but nothing life-threatening. That's good. But before you get proper treatment, I need a debrief. Can you walk?" "Yes, sir." They led her to the operations center. Sarah gave them everything, the crash landing, staying behind, the defensive fight, all of it. Reeves and Hendricks asked questions, taking notes, occasionally exchanging glances that Sarah couldn't quite read. When she finished, Reeves sat back in his chair. "Captain, do you realize what you've done?" "Survived, sir." "More than that, intelligence intercepted enemy communications from the valley. They're calling you the Ghost of Death." They thought the compound was defended by an entire American unit. When they realized it was one person, one pilot in a damaged aircraft, well, it's had an effect on their morale. "That's good, sir." "It's more than good, it's strategic." He paused. "It's also going to make you famous, whether you want to be or not." Sarah's stomach sank. "Sir, I'd prefer to just get back to flying." "I'm sure you would, but this story is already spreading. Captain Hayes has recommended you for the Medal of Honor. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs is personally reviewing the after-action reports." He leaned forward. "Captain, you're about to become the face of American heroism. The question is, are you ready for that?" Sarah thought about all the times she'd been doubted, dismissed, underestimated. She thought about Brad Mitchell's smirk, about the whispers, about having to prove herself over and over again. "I just want to do my job, sir." Reeves nodded slowly. "I respect that, but the job just got bigger." The medical staff finally got hold of her after the debrief, taking her to the base hospital. Most of her injuries were minor, Cuts, bruises, a mild concussion. The bullet graze on her arm needed stitches, and she had some hearing damage from the cannon fire, but nothing permanent. While she was being treated, a nurse told her she had visitors. Marcus Davis came in first, looking like he'd aged 10 years in one day. "Sarah," he said, his voice rough, "when you said you were staying behind, I thought we'd never see you again." "I'm tougher than I look," Sarah said. "No kidding." He pulled a chair over and sat down heavily. "Listen, I need to tell you something. Mitchell's been running his mouth since we got back. He's saying you stayed behind because you panicked, because you couldn't handle the pressure of getting out with everyone else." Sarah felt anger flare in her chest, but she pushed it down. Of course Brad was spinning it that way. Of course he couldn't just acknowledge what she'd done. "Let him say what he wants," she said tiredly. "That's bull, and you know it. I was there. I heard the whole thing on the radio. You made a tactical decision to maximize survivors." He leaned closer. "And I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth. I'm writing a full report, and I've talked to Hayes. We're both putting in statements supporting your Medal of Honor recommendation." "You don't have to do that." "Yeah, I do, because it's right. And because I'm tired of watching good pilots get torn down by jealous idiots." After Davis left, Jessica Torres came by, along with several other pilots from the squadron. They crowded into the small hospital room, all talking at once, congratulating her, asking questions. "I knew you were good," Jess said, "but damn, Sarah, you're like a legend now." "I don't want to be a legend," Sarah protested. "I want to be a pilot." "Well, you're both now. Get used to it." Over the next 2 days, Sarah recovered in the hospital while the base buzzed with activity. The story had leaked to the press back home, and suddenly there were reporters calling, news networks wanting interviews, even a call from someone claiming to represent a Hollywood studio. Sarah refused all of them. She just wanted to rest. On the 3rd day, Colonel Reeves came to visit again. This time, he had Major Hendricks and another officer with him, a brigadier general Sarah didn't recognize. "Captain Chen," Reeves said, "this is General Patricia Morrison from Air Combat Command." Sarah tried to sit up straighter in the hospital bed. "General." Morrison was a stern-looking woman in her 50s with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. She pulled up a chair and sat down, studying Sarah for a long moment. "I've read the reports," Morrison said. "All of them, including Captain Mitchell's." Sarah's jaw tightened, and Mitchell's report is clearly colored by personal bias, which is why I'm disregarding it." She paused. "I've also spoken with Captain Hayes and his entire team. They're unanimous in their assessment. You saved their lives through exceptional courage and skill." "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me yet. I'm here because we need to make a decision about your future." Morrison leaned back. "The Medal of Honor recommendation will go through. I'm confident of that. But there's a question about what happens after. Some people think you should go on a publicity tour, represent the Air Force to the public. Others think you should go to a training command, teach the next generation. And some think you should stay in a combat squadron." Sarah didn't hesitate. "I want to stay in combat operations, ma'am. That's where I can do the most good." Morrison smiled slightly. "That's what I thought you'd say, and I agree, but there's a problem." "Ma'am, your aircraft, Phoenix, is a total loss. Even if we could recover it, which we can't, the damage is too extensive. You need a new plane." Sarah felt a pang of loss. Phoenix had been hers for 3 years, through dozens of missions. They'd been through everything together. "When you get back to Davis-Monthan," Morrison continued, "you'll be assigned a new A-10, and I'm promoting you to major effective immediately. You'll also be given command of your own flight within the squadron." Sarah blinked. "Command?" 4 aircraft, 3 other pilots reporting to you. You've proved you can lead under the most extreme conditions. Time to make it official." Thank you, ma'am. I'm honored." Morrison stood. "You earned it, Major Chen. Now get well so you can get back to work." After the general left, Sarah sat in her hospital bed trying to process everything. Major, Flight Commander, a Medal of Honor nomination. It felt unreal. That evening, Captain Hayes came to visit one last time before his team shipped out to their next assignment. "Came to say goodbye," he said, "and to give you something." He handed her a patch, the Special Forces crest with a personal inscription embroidered on it. "To the Guardian Angel of Kandahar, from Vanguard Team, you're always one of us." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you. No, thank you. My team, all 12 of us, were going home to our families because of you. Rodriguez is going to meet his daughter for the first time next month. Jenkins is going to his son's wedding. Miller's going to finish his degree. He paused. Those moments happened because you chose to stay. Never forget that. After he left, Sarah held the patch, running her fingers over the embroidery. She thought about the men she'd saved, the lives that would continue because of decisions she'd made in a few desperate hours. Maybe it was worth it. All the doubts, all the struggles, all the times she'd had to prove herself. Maybe it all led to this moment, to being in exactly the right place at the right time to make a difference. She looked out the window at the desert night, at the stars blazing overhead. Somewhere out there, Phoenix sat abandoned in a compound, her faithful plane that had carried her through so much. "Rest easy, girl," she whispered. "You did good, we both did." The next morning, Sarah was cleared to fly back to the States. She boarded a C-17 transport along with other personnel rotating home. As the plane climbed away from Fob Striker, she looked out the window one last time at the base, at the valley beyond where she'd fought her battle. She was going home, going back to face whatever came next, the publicity, the ceremony, the new responsibilities. But most importantly, she was going back to flying. Because that's what she was, not a hero, not a legend. Just a pilot. And she had a lot more flying to do. The C-17 touched down at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base 3 days later, after stops in Germany and Virginia. Sarah had spent most of the flight sleeping, finally able to rest without the weight of immediate danger. When she woke for the landing, she felt more human than she had in a week. What she wasn't prepared for was the crowd. As the cargo ramp lowered, Sarah saw what had to be hundreds of people waiting on the tarmac. Airmen, officers, maintenance crews, even some civilians. Someone had hung a banner that read, "Welcome home, Major CHEN," in huge letters. "Uh-oh," Marcus Davis said beside her. He'd been on the same transport returning from his own deployment. "I think they're here for you." "Can I just hide in the cargo hold until they leave?" Sarah asked. "Too late, they've seen you." As Sarah walked down the ramp, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. It was overwhelming, dozens of people calling her name, wanting to shake her hand, congratulate her. She smiled and nodded and tried to be gracious, but inside she just wanted to get to her quarters and take a proper shower. Colonel Reeves appeared, cutting through the crowd. "Major Chen, welcome home. I know you're tired, but we have a few things to take care of first." He led her to the base headquarters, where she was officially promoted in a small ceremony. Her mother had flown in from San Francisco, a tiny woman with gray hair and a fierce expression that softened when she saw her daughter. "Sarah," her mother said, hugging her tightly, "I was so worried." "I'm okay, Mom, I'm fine." "Fine, you were on every news channel. They showed pictures of your plane all shot up. They said you fought off hundreds of men by yourself." "The news exaggerates." Her mother pulled back and looked at her seriously. "Your father would have been so proud." Sarah felt her throat tighten. Her father had been a Marine, killed in Iraq when Sarah was 15. He was the reason she'd joined the military, the reason she'd pushed herself so hard. Everything she'd done was partly to honor his memory. "I hope so," Sarah said quietly. After the ceremony, Reeves took her aside. "I need to brief you on a situation that's developed." Sarah's good mood evaporated. "What kind of situation?" "Captain Mitchell has filed a formal complaint. He's alleging that you showed poor judgment by staying behind, that you disobeyed implied orders to evacuate, and that you recklessly endangered yourself and your aircraft." Sarah stared at him. "He's what?" "He's also implying that the Medal of Honor recommendation is politically motivated, that the Air Force is pushing your story because they want a female hero." Anger burned in Sarah's chest, hot and fierce. "That's garbage. He wasn't even there for the extraction. He doesn't know what happened." "I know that. General Morrison knows that. Anyone who reads the actual reports knows that. But Mitchell has some support from a few old-school officers who think women shouldn't be in combat roles." Reeves held up his hand as Sarah started to protest. "They're wrong and they're going to lose this fight, but it's going to be messy." "What do I need to do?" "Nothing for now. There's going to be an inquiry, standard procedure when a complaint is filed. You'll testify, Mitchell will testify, and will present all the evidence. It should be over in a few weeks." He paused. But Sarah, I want you to be prepared. This could get ugly. The inquiry was scheduled for 3 weeks later, giving Sarah time to settle back into routine life. She was assigned to a new aircraft, a fresh A-10 that the crew chief, Rodriguez, had personally selected and prepared. Sarah named it Phoenix II in honor of her old plane. She also met her new flight, 3 captains who would be reporting to her. 2 of them, Davis and Captain Amy Collins, were pilots she knew and trusted. The third was a younger pilot named Lieutenant Ryan Park, fresh from his first deployment. "I'll be honest, Major," Park said during their first meeting. "I requested to be in your flight, what you did out there. That's the kind of leadership I want to learn from." Sarah felt uncomfortable with the hero worship in his eyes, but she nodded. "Then, pay attention, because I'm going to teach you everything I know about keeping people alive." Training missions resumed. Sarah flew twice a day, running her flight through drills, teaching them tactics, evaluating their performance. It felt good to be back in the air, doing the job she loved. But in the background, the inquiry loomed. When the day finally came, Sarah walked into the hearing room wearing her dress uniform, all her ribbons and decorations displayed. The room was set up like a small courtroom, with a panel of 3 officers sitting at the front, 2 colonels and a brigadier general. Brad Mitchell was already there, sitting with a lawyer. He looked confident, smug even. When he saw Sarah, he gave her that familiar smirk. The proceedings started with Mitchell presenting his complaint. He argued that Sarah had violated protocols by staying behind, that she'd been motivated by pride rather than tactical necessity, and that she'd risked an expensive aircraft unnecessarily. "The proper procedure," Mitchell said, "would have been to destroy the aircraft and evacuate with the ground forces. Instead, Major, Chen made an emotional decision that could have ended badly." Sarah's lawyer, a sharp JAG officer named Captain Williams, cross-examined him. "Captain Mitchell, where were you during the extraction phase?" "I was providing air support from altitude." "So you didn't have eyes on the situation in the compound?" "I could see the general tactical situation." "But you couldn't see that the extraction helicopter was overloaded, could you?" Mitchell hesitated. "No, but—" "And you weren't in communication with Captain Hayes when he made the decision about who would stay and who would evacuate?" "No." "So your entire complaint is based on assumptions about a situation you didn't directly observe?" "I'm basing it on proper procedure and—" "Thank you, Captain. No further questions." Then it was Sarah's turn to testify. She walked through everything that had happened, calmly and clearly. She explained the tactical situation, the weight constraints on the helicopter, the logic behind her decision. "I had a weapon system that could provide defensive fire," she said. "I had communications equipment, even though it later failed. I had cover in the compound. The alternative was to leave Captain Hayes and some of his men behind, which would have meant certain death for them. My decision maximized the number of survivors." "But Major," one of the colonels on the panel asked, "didn't you also put yourself at significant risk?" "Yes, sir, but that's the job. We accept risk to accomplish the mission and protect our people." "Some would argue you exceeded acceptable risk levels." Sarah looked at him directly. "With respect, sir, 12 Special Forces soldiers and 4 helicopter crew members are alive right now because I stayed. How is that exceeding acceptable risk?" The colonel nodded slowly and made a note. Captain Hayes testified next, via video conference from his current deployment. He was unequivocal in his support. "Major Chen saved my team," he said flatly. "There's no question about that. If she'd left with the helicopter, we'd all be dead. She made the right call, and anyone who says otherwise wasn't there and doesn't understand the situation." Sergeant Kowalski testified. So did the Chinook pilot. So did Marcus Davis. One by one, everyone who had been there that day told the same story. Sarah had made a difficult decision under extreme pressure, and it had saved lives. The inquiry lasted 3 days. At the end, the panel deliberated for 2 hours before calling everyone back. The Brigadier General spoke. "This panel has reviewed all testimony and evidence. We find that Major Chen's actions, while unconventional, were tactically sound and in keeping with the highest traditions of the Air Force. The complaint is dismissed." He looked directly at Brad Mitchell. "Furthermore, Captain Mitchell, your complaint appears to have been motivated by personal animosity rather than genuine concern for proper procedure. You are hereby formally reprimanded and will receive counseling regarding appropriate professional conduct. Mitchell's face went red. Sir, I object. Your objection is noted and overruled. Dismissed. As people filed out of the room, Marcus Davis clapped Sarah on the shoulder. Justice, he said simply. But Sarah didn't feel triumphant. She felt tired. Even winning this fight felt exhausting. Mitchell caught up with her in the hallway outside. You think this is over, he said, his voice low and angry. You think one hearing changes anything? You're going to be looking over your shoulder your whole career, Chen. People like me will always be there, questioning, doubting. Brad, Sarah interrupted quietly. I don't care anymore. He blinked. What? I don't care what you think. I don't care about your doubts or your complaints or your opinions. I've proved myself more times than I can count, and I'm done seeking approval from people who will never give it. She stepped closer. I saved 12 lives. That's real. That matters. Your petty jealousy, that's just noise. She walked away, leaving him standing in the hallway. 2 weeks later, Sarah received word that her Medal of Honor recommendation had been approved. The ceremony would be at the White House in 6 months. 6 months, Sarah asked Colonel Reeves. Why so long? Because the president wants to make it special. This is only the second Medal of Honor awarded to a woman since World War II. It's a big deal, Sarah. The months passed in a blur of training missions and public appearances. Sarah did a few interviews, spoke at a couple of events, but mostly she focused on her job, leading her flight, training her pilots, running missions. Phoenix II performed beautifully, and Sarah found herself bonding with the new aircraft just as she had with the original. Rodriguez kept it in perfect condition, taking pride in maintaining the hero's plane, as he called it. Sarah's flight became one of the top-performing units in the squadron. Lieutenant Park turned into an excellent pilot under her mentorship. Even Brad Mitchell seemed to fade into the background, transferred to a different unit after his reprimand. Then came the day of the ceremony. Sarah flew to Washington, D.C. with her mother and a small group of friends from the squadron. The White House was impressive, all marble and history. Sarah wore her dress uniform, feeling awkward and out of place among the politicians and dignitaries. Captain Hayes was there with his entire team, all of them in their dress uniforms. They found Sarah before the ceremony started. Wouldn't miss this for the world, Hayes said. We're all witnesses to what you did. The ceremony was held in the East Room, packed with people. Sarah stood at attention while the president read the citation, describing her actions that day in the valley. It felt surreal, hearing her decisions and actions described in such formal language. Then the president placed the medal around her neck, the distinctive blue ribbon and star. Major Sarah Chen, the president said, you represent the very best of American military service. Your courage, your skill, and your unwavering commitment to protecting your fellow soldiers are an inspiration to us all. The room erupted in applause. Sarah stood there, feeling the weight of the medal, thinking about that day in the compound. She thought about Phoenix, her old plane sitting abandoned in that valley. She thought about the men she'd saved, now home with their families. She thought about her father and hoped he could see this moment somehow. After the ceremony, there was a reception. People kept coming up to congratulate her, shake her hand, thank her for her service. It was overwhelming. She found a quiet corner and was catching her breath when Captain Hayes approached. How you holding up? He asked. Honestly, I just want to go home and fly my plane. He laughed. That's why you're good at this. You never forgot what matters. What happened to Rodriguez? Sarah asked. The soldier I helped carry to the helicopter. He's good, fully recovered. He's actually here, came to see you get the medal. Hayes gestured across the room, and Sarah saw him, the young man she'd helped save, now in his dress uniform, talking to someone. Rodriguez looked up, caught her eye, and smiled. He raised a glass in salute. Sarah smiled back. That's what this was really about. Not the medal, not the ceremony, not the recognition. It was about that moment, that connection, one soldier helping another. That evening, Sarah stood on the balcony of her hotel room, looking out at the D.C. skyline. Her mother had gone to bed, and the other guests from the ceremony had departed. She was finally alone with her thoughts. Her phone buzzed, a text from Marcus Davis. Saw you on the news. You cleaned up nice, now get back here. We have a training mission on Monday. Sarah smiled. That was what she needed to get back to routine, back to the job, back to being just another pilot in the squadron. Well, maybe not just another pilot anymore, but still a pilot, still someone who flew planes and protected people and did the work. She touched the medal still hanging around her neck. It was heavy, both literally and figuratively. It represented responsibility, expectations, legacy. But Sarah had never been afraid of responsibility. She'd proved that in a compound halfway around the world, sitting in a damaged aircraft, fighting off hundreds of enemies to protect 12 men she barely knew. She'd prove it again tomorrow, and the day after, and every day for the rest of her career. Because that's what she was,